Neverwinter Nights 2 Enhanced Edition has been out for a while, and the only cut content it restored is bugs. The good news is, the final installment of the Neverwinter Nights 2 cut content series is here, so welcome. This time, we're diving into Mask of the Betrayer, the cancelled third expansion, and the last scraps from the original campaign. By the end of this video, you'll know just how small Neverwinter Nights 2 shipped compared to its original vision. Let's get to it. Our little cut content trip starts in West Harbor, right where the game begins with the timeless
"So many years ago today."
Originally, we could find Dagon's old adventuring gear in his room. If we wore his equipment before he allowed us to take it, he would call us out on the theft.
A curiously familiar choice in arms and armor, but keep them for now. You will need them. I'm sure that which I planned on giving you isn't where I last left it.
In the final game, however, the chest by his bed contains only an Arvorine's Amulet of Aid, which is good for nothing except for sale. Not that Dagon's adventuring gear wouldn't find its way to some pawn shop in Neverwinter Docks. But there used to be a much more interesting item in Dagon's memory chest, a portrait of an elvish lady. The description read, "Buried in a chest in Dagon's bedroom, you found this portrait of an elvish lady in shadowy forest." It's difficult to make out her details because the painting is faded and creased from years of improper storage. She certainly appears to have been beautiful. So Shayla was an elf after all, and thus the theory from my second video saying she was a halfling is officially debunked. But Dagon's chest wasn't the only one with treasures in that house. The one in the player's character room contained some story and class-specific items. Acorn of the Sage, a gift from Dagon of all people, is a curious example. Its description says that it allows you to understand many languages, which implies that a language system might have been planned for the game. While it was probably dropped due to lack of fun uses and low priority, language systems were very common on persistent worlds, and not used that much in my experience. Anyway, in the West Harbor module, you can also find the Black Silk Cloak, which provides a +4 constitution bonus. The description says the cloak contains a single battered silver shard which feels warm to the player character's touch. In the end, I think it was replaced with the silver shard from the Swamp Ruins. Unlike a cloak, it doesn't need to be worn to work, and it's easier to handle in story events. And besides, extra 10 hit points that the Silver Shard provides is a better deal for low HP classes like Wizard. The rest of the player character's items, such as the Book of Tarmas, Prayer Book of Lathander, and Leaves of Kaelil, seem class dependent and would give you some low-level spell charges. Curiously, Kaelil seems to refer to Kalail, the druid that goes crazy in a bear form in the Maiden's Glade. Speaking of druids, originally Eleni was supposed to tell us of the Sky Mirror of her own accord at some point. In the final game, we learn about it from the wounded druid in a wolf form in Neverwinter. The deleted scene was fully voiced and I'm not sure why they cut it. It had two interesting ways it could play out. In the first one, surprise surprise, Mishka is suspicious of Eleni, but only if you play a male character. Let's hear it.
Forgive me, but I've been giving the matter of these shards some thought, and I think I have a solution that may help us all. I know we're having trouble reaching the sage in this city, but the lore keepers of the druid circles may be easier to contact and may even know more than the sages of Neverwinter do. I understand, but the druids may know more, and these shards seem to have a history that dates back longer than we know, but perhaps not the land itself. Please, let me help. More than the shards may be involved, and I need to know more. My circle. I've not been able to contact them for some time. It is odd I have not been able to contact the elders, Vashni and Nevan. But there are other circles, the druids of Neverwinter Wood. They may be able to help where the circle of the mayor cannot. I cannot attempt to contact them here in the city, and they seldom have an established meeting ground. But there is a druid sanctuary some distance from Neverwinter, the Sky Mirror, where it is said the Neverwinter Wood druids are able to commune with each other, no matter what the distance. I can mark the location upon your map, but like the Maiden's Glade, you'll be unable to find it without my help.
Sounds convenient.
I'm sorry?
Well, if you need an excuse to travel with him, this sure sounds like a good excuse, or a lie, or whatever you call it. Look, I already suggested we go after Leldon, so I say we do that.
Finding out about these shards is more important than one of your petty crimes. Can you really be so shallow?
Gods, I hope so. I like it.
Then it seems there is nothing more to say. If you change your mind, then tell me. The Sky Mirror is still marked on your map in the meantime.
In the second one, if you're mean to Eleni, she gets super angry and it very much pleases Nishka. Here it goes.
If it affects the mayor, it is my concern. Our concern. I'm trying to help. Forget it then. If you change your mind, let me know. Until then, you can burn in the hells.
It's not too bad down there, actually. And the last time you tried to help us, we walked into a glade filled with vicious animals.
That was not my doing.
Oh, so Kelgar led us there. I must have forgotten in all the confusion.
If you wish my help, then speak to me, and I shall do what I can. Until then, you can keep your own counsel.
Now, I do have some doubt if this is truly removed. See, the dialogue file of the Wolf Druid does have a line for having already used the Sky Mirror. Of course, it won't show up in-game unless the condition is met, but it is there. It could also imply more open-ended nature of the game earlier in the development. Still, all sources I've come across mention the wolf being the only way to get to the Sky Mirror, and Eleni's Sky Mirror dialogue file also seems orphaned. But do let me know if you've had that Eleni cutscene fire up. Anyway, since both conversations happen in Neverwinter, let's talk about the city itself. You see, it clearly used to have more interior areas than in the final game. You can see the map notes for the weaponsmith and armorsmith shops in the merchant district in Act 3, clearly left due to sloppy rushed cuts. There was also another inn in the city, Shining Serpent Inn. There is still some dialogue in the game files connected to it. However, contrary to the Realms lore, the Shining Serpent was located in the docks in Neverwinter Nights 2, while normally it should be located in Beggar's Nest. Finally, Parr's house, which is in Highcliff in the final game, also used to be in the docks. You know, I always thought it felt out of place in Highcliff, especially that 6 dangerously looking thugs would be very noticeable in a village like that. But in the Neverwinter docks, that's just another day in the hood. By the way, the fair city of Neverwinter used to have an orphan-powered fast travel system, similar to that at the Crossroad Keep. I suppose it was originally tied to the Hollows, the removed first stronghold. Still, Wolf and his gang do invite themselves into the Sunken Flagon, so I have no idea why Obsidian deleted it. But back to cut areas. Portlast is another butchered settlement. Before the cuts, the Cracked Anvil was not a market stand but a smithy in its own right. Then there also used to be a magic shop, probably run by Naya, and a quartermaster's house. I've also found mentions of Wagonworks shop, but I have no idea why it was there. Maybe it was connected to the removed ride skill. Finally, the town had a tavern called the Jack and Saber. Ultimately, I suppose these areas were cut because they didn't add that much except for loading screens. In general, a ton of areas got cut. A ton. There are more hints at this than I can reasonably list, so just remember, it was carnage. Moving on, but not quite, because we are still in the docks. The cutscene at the Sunken Flagon, which ends the Act 1, is incomplete in the final game. Originally, after Bishop suggested we drown the flagon in wine, the camera would pan outside the inn and show Black Garius and Torio Claven. Garius would call our party fools for doing him a favor, likely meaning the defeat of the Githyanki. Then, the evil mastermind would ask Torio if something was done, obviously referring to the Ember Massacre, foreshadowing the events of Act 2. By the way, remember the cutscene where we see Torio, Lorne, and Garius for the first time? The one when Garius speaks to them in some back alley? I always found that scenery odd, but did you know they were having this super secret conversation right next to the Sunken Flagon and that building that was supposed to be the Hollows? I mean, any drunk from the Flagon could have bumped into them when going to take a slash. Or a patron could simply open a window and hear everything. What the fuck? Alright, sticking to dimwits, let's talk about Bevel. In the final game, we are told he went missing for a while, right after we left West Harbor. He is nowhere to be found in the village and is said to only leave his house for militia practice. He resurfaces only at the Crossroad Keep in Act 3. However, at some point in production, we could talk to Bevel in West Harbor at different stages of the main quest. He would be very secretive about being ambushed and tortured in the swamps though. Moreover, he was recruitable for both the Hollows and the Crossroad Keep. Now, let's take a leap in the story to Amongeros Haven, as this module was hit really hard by the cuts. First off, the Haven was only accessible via a secret tunnel in Shandra's cellar. There seems to be some puzzle connected to it as well, but it's difficult to tell the details from the leftover scripts. There were definitely non-hostile shadows involved, and they would eventually open the secret door. Neverwinter Nights 2 did have some puzzles like that, some more idiotic than others. Anyway, past the secret door, it was no walk in the park. On your way, you'd have to deal with traps, dire bears, and umber hulks. What's more, we need to talk about the distance too. Between Highcliff and Amongero's Haven, there's about 200 kilometers as the crow flies. At least according to my extremely scientific calculations. That being said, the tunnel area was likely the only eventful part of the journey, or it led to some kind of a portal. In the former case, it's not impossible that it led through the Underdark. It also appears there would be some voice talking to us in this area. The speaker tag suggests it's Amongero, although chances are this was Ammon's automagic secretary or some such. Fast forward to Act 3, let's talk about the Luskan business. If you've been following the series, you know there used to be an entire Luskan module, and now we have another hint at its contents. First off, it used to be possible to ask Sand about the way to defeat the Shadow Reavers, to which he would respond,
"We will need to know their true names. And that means we must find them from the archives in the host tower of the Arcane."
This is a serious hint we were indeed meant to visit the host tower in Luskan, especially if you consider the other clues. Cut dialogue with Aldanon says that the Arcane Brotherhood has a threshold compass. In case you forgot or haven't seen the first cut content video, it was the second artifact needed to get to the Vale of Merdelain. Then, there is an unused plot variable in the game files that tracks whether we visited Luskan and obtained a threshold compass. Moreover, there is a character model called NPC Host Tower in the game files, although it's broken. There's also one for Morkai, but it ended up being used by Starter. Now, Morkai the Red, according to the Realms lore, was the guardian of the North Tower of the Host Tower and a powerful mage. However, he was murdered years before the events of the original campaign. But he did make appearances as a spirit in the Realms lore, so it's quite possible this would be one of such cases. How is he connected to everything else? Well, your guess is as good as mine. However, Sand still does say in the game that there is likely somebody at the host tower with a grudge against Black Garius, willing to help us out. I have a feeling Morkai might have been that somebody. In any case, it looks like Obsidian left a loose end here, wouldn't you say? Another piece of the Luskan puzzle is Sydney Natal, who also visited the cutting room and left it a bit lighter. The meeting with her, unlike in the final game, originally took place on the Luskan soil. It was also possible to convince her to work with us. There is still a diplomacy check dialogue option left in the game files, along with her response to a successful check. Unfortunately, this is all that is left. However, I think it's reasonable to assume that we could use a different speech check. It's also possible that some plot events could sway her, like say freeing Lucien, the Luskan agent imprisoned by the Fire Giants. As the game shipped, the conversation assumes we failed the check. You can even see that the content butcher did a half-assed job and left the check result in the dialogue window. The whole thing was supposed to be a cutscene, by the way, not a voiceless convo. But again, a lot of cutscenes met that fate in Neverwinter Nights 2. Anyway, the battle with Sydney was meant to be different too. In the deleted cutscene, she would cast some spell at ZJV and incapacitate her. Then, the player character Enquara, also weakened by the spell, would face Sydney, the Animus, and likely the rest of the Luskan entourage. Curiously, it seems that at some point we could go to this meeting with a full party which Sydney would take out with a single spell. But you know what my biggest discovery is? I finally know how to pronounce the Githzerais name. It's ZJV. Well, with Sydney in the ground and having the true name scroll on us, we were no longer helpless against the Shadow Reavers. And about them, there were 2 missions before the Crossroad Keep siege instead of just 1. Originally, between destroying the bridges and defending the keep, we were supposed to infiltrate the camp of a Shadow Reaver and take him out. The journal entry of this quest says that, quote, Dagon has informed you of the 3 principal routes into the enemy camp. The northern and the southern paths are more heavily guarded, but allow access to individual groups of undead that otherwise might defend the main camp. The western and central path is the most direct, but it's also the most dangerous of the three, as the enemy will be able to easily spot your movements and muster great defenses in the camp." Unquote. Personally, I don't get the choice here. I mean, when I read it, all I get is blah blah blah, kill them all anyway. But okay, never mind. The whole quest would take place in a removed area where we'd fight both regular and giant versions of undead. Speaking of giant things, let's talk about Nololov's Valley. First off, when we first arrive at the site, black dragons observe us from the cliffs. If we attack the Crystal Heart, they attack too. However, only 2 dragons attack, while there are 3 dragons observing us. So, unless one of them shat his scales, somebody decided that 3 dragons was an overkill. As far as I'm concerned, I say give me harder battles, Obsidian. I'm not impressed. And it actually might have been the case. It looks like we were originally supposed to fight 1 or more red dragons there. Or the black ones had a red friend maybe. In the end, there's only 1 red dragon in the game, and I see a lot of wasted potential with it. You know, I always regretted there was no script for the red dragon to react to us wearing the red dragon scale armor. Or I'd love to be able to respond to threats with something like bold words for a lizard about to become my new boots. Although I guess Amon-Jero says something like that. He straight up walks into a dragon's lair and is like, "Get the f*** out of my lair."
If you wish to avoid death, I suggest you leave this place. Our patience is short.
Savage. I actually want to devote a video to Ammon. To be more precise, to an alternate version of the original campaign where he is the protagonist. Let me know if you're interested in something like that. But back to Nololov's Valley. There used to be a lovely detail involved in the destruction of the Crystal Heart. After that huge flash of light subsided, all the plants and trees in the valley were supposed to be dead. And finally, I have a theory that the valley used to be something else entirely. See, there's this concept art circulating the old internet, and it supposedly showed the astral plane. Now, look at the dragon's bones and the heart thingy. Looks like anything? I think our encounter with Nololov might have taken place in the astral plane. Or the valley was supposed to look much cooler with the giant dragon skeleton and whatnot. Still, Astral Plane definitely looks like a place ZJV and the player character should visit on their way. Well, Astral Plane made a small appearance in Mask of the Betrayer. However, originally it had an entire module of its own. This particular cut came for a different reason than you might think though. On Mad Chat, George Zeitz, the creative lead, said that the Astral Plane was reduced to a single area to improve the pacing of the story. And that it did. It reminds me of Cursed and Carceri in Planescape Torment. Did you know we were meant to look for Cursed in the plane of Carceri? The cut was made because of Rush this time of course, but worked to the story's advantage in the end. Check out my Planescape Torment retrospective if you want to know more things like that about the game. For the moment, let's go back to Mask of the Betrayer. This might break some hearts out there, but there used to be a romance arc planned for Kaelin the Dove. That's right, George Zeitz revealed that in an interview for Grimoire Sferowca, a Polish Planescape Torment fan site, linked below. He also mentioned that while this cut made him a little sad, having no romantic arc made sense for her. It's true, but I can't help but think made sense isn't the same as it was better this way in this case. There's also evidence out there that Chris Avellone hates writing typical romance, but I think a romantic arc precisely in the vein of that of Anna or Fall from Grace would fit Kaelin very well. But a much worse thing than having no romance nearly happened. Now, I'm going to change the rules here for a bit and talk about things, or rather people, that were almost cut. You see, Kaelin the Dove barely escaped the chopping block. George Zeitz talked on Giant Bomb's podcast how they didn't have the capacity to write her, but Chris Avellone volunteered for the job. Furthermore, Gan's fate was uncertain as well, and so Avellone offered to write him too. You know, I think Kaelin and Gan are some of his best works, and he isn't credited for them often enough. Especially if you consider how big of an impact those two had on Mask of the Betrayer. So, credit time. Chris Avellone was the lead designer of Planescape Torment and then wrote 2 great companions in its true spiritual successor. Oh, and it was also Chris Avellone who appointed George Zeitz as the creative lead on Mask of the Betrayer. And you know, Mask of the Betrayer would have suffered greatly without its full companion roster. Imagine if Kalen had been removed altogether and Gan was butchered like, say, Nishka. Imagine me saying there are some vague remnants in the dialogue files that Gan was somehow related to the Coven and he probably was romanceable too. Imagine me saying that there was supposed to be another companion referred to as Kalen in the game files. She was apparently a cleric of Ilmater, but we don't know much else because she was caught very early. And too bad, it would be cool to see her during the confrontation with Merkel, or take a stance in the Third Crusade. You know what? I'm done. It's gut-wrenching to even say that. Moving on. Another thing that was removed from Mask of the Betrayer was the destruction of the Wall of the Faithless. I've already talked about the fact and the reasons behind it in the third video in the series. However, at the time, I didn't know about the remnant of that removed ending hidden in the game files. I think this image would appear in the end slides if we destroyed the City of Judgment, or at least the Wall of the Faithless. Normally, I'd say an edited stock picture of a nuclear explosion wouldn't make it into the final game, but then I remembered the one of many end slide. I sometimes tend to overestimate Obsidian Entertainment like that. Last but not least, did you know a third expansion was allegedly greenlit by Atari but cancelled due to poor sales of Storm of Zahir at the last moment? And the day the contract was signed, no less. This is according to Luke Skoll at least, known for his work on premium modules for the original Neverwinter Nights. He was also the lead designer and one of the writers of Mysteries of Westgate, the only premium module for Neverwinter Nights 2. Skoll mentioned the third Neverwinter Nights 2 expansion on his website and on his X profile. On the latter, he said how he was already committed to the project and moved abroad to participate. And then, Atari pulled the plug. For some reason though, Skoll removed the mention of NX3 from his website. Which is weird, because The Witcher Scars of Betrayal, a cancelled expansion for the original Witcher, is still there. Now, it's probably not much of a consolation, but I think the third expansion wouldn't have worked anyway. First off, Wizards of the Coast sued Atari over the Dungeons & Dragons license in 2009. As a result, Atari lost the publishing rights 2 years later. And frankly, I'm not convinced that episodic formula would have worked. Let's be real, interest in Neverwinter Nights 2 waned quickly. I just don't see a happy ending to this endeavor. If anything, NX3 would have ended up like Darkness over Daggerford, released for free because Atari cancelled the premium module program. But to end this series on a high note, let's talk about one last thing that was pulled from the original campaign: the player character's diary. Here's what the item description said, quote, "Reading through your diary, you're surprised how many words you use to describe your simple life and the even simpler village of West Harbor. When you were very young, there was a great battle that almost completely destroyed the village. Your mother was killed along with most of the other villagers. From that time on, you were raised by your foster father, Dagan Forlong. He has never shown much interest in you or anything else for that matter. West Harbor is an isolated village, without much contact with the outside world. Like many farmers, you've never been more than a few leagues from your home. Some of your diary entries sadly admit that it's likely that nothing interesting will ever happen in your life." Unquote. Well, how wrong was that? If you've made it this far from the very first video of the Cut Content series, you know as well as I that Neverwinter Nights 2 was supposed to be a completely different game. The ultimate D&D computer experience, as one of the loading screen tips boldly states. If you liked the series and want to help the channel grow, consider subscribing. Also, big thanks to Erfu for his enormous help with researching and discussing the topic. Neverwinter Nights 2 is an old flame of mine, but it's time to move on. So stick around, there's still plenty of love for CRPGs I want to share with you. And just enough hate to keep it spicy. In the meantime, thank you for watching and I hope to see you in my next video.